When election day arrives, we see stickers everywhere that say, "I voted." There are campaigns, commercials, and billboards that are posted to grab your attention to remind you to vote. What we don't really hear is why voting is important. Voting is a right that was fought for and won in 1965 that allowed every U.S. citizen to vote. You may wonder why it's necessary to vote when you could care less about politics, or you don't believe your one vote matters. If you are undecided about voting, I hope to instill this belief and prove to you why it is important to vote. I have researched the importance of voting and have multiple references on this topic. In this speech, I will move my audience to vote in the next upcoming election, and by sharing with you the history that allows Americans to vote, explaining how to vote, and why people do not vote, and why every individual vote matters. The first point I bring to you today is the history of voting. In 2019, Scholastic stated that white men and a small portion of black men were allowed to vote in the 1820s and 1830s. Black men were slaves and were looked down upon because they weren't as privileged as white men. The 14th Amendment was written in 1866 to set the voting age to 21 years old. Then, in 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment to grant all men the right to vote, no matter their race or color. In 2008 book, Milestone Documents in American U.S. History, Paul Finkelman and Bruce A. Lesh could now mention that even though African American men could now vote, they still had to put up a fight to cast their votes. Many polling places were placed in distant locations or in the middle of white sections of their county. State legislators wanted blacks to have as little of a voice as possible. Therefore, they prohibited blacks from voting in the Democratic Party. Since Democratic candidates almost always won the elections, this method was effective because it meant that votes from the African Americans did not really matter. According to Yoher Williams on the 2019 website History.com, women fought to obtain the same social, political, and economic rights. Massive parades were staged to dramatize the denial and hope that they would civilize a basic right to women. Williams mentions a lady named Alice Paul, who fought for women to have the right to vote. Paul set up a picket, which was a form of protesting, to gain equal rights for women. Williams states, Paul was thrown into solitary confinement and beaten because of the picket she staged at the White House. Stated by History.com, it took activists and reformers nearly 100 years to gain the right to vote for women in the United States. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women the right to vote. Paul Finkelman and Bruce A. Lesh mentioned that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was one of the most successful pieces of civil rights legislation ever adopted by the U.S. Congress. This act gave reformers tools to transform election laws and procedures for all Americans. This act outlawed vote denial based on race or color and gave the executive branch and federal courts powerful new abilities. Finkelman and Lesh point out that the Voting Act's right froze all Southern election laws in place of its passage. If state officials wanted to change laws or procedures, they would have to receive clearance from the federal courts beforehand. The second point I bring to you is how to vote. On the report of 2019 USA Gov, bringing a driver's license, state-issued ID, military card, or a passport is almost always required at every voting poll. A photo ID helps prove and identify that you are the person casting your vote. Other states accept some types of non-phototype ID, such as birth certificates, bank statements, utility bills, and social security cards. Make sure to know your state's voting ID requirements before Election Day. When registering to vote, you can fill out an application online or go to your local DMV. You will need to choose a political party, either Democrat or Republican. When voting for the general election, you may choose to vote for whichever party you feel is most suited to lead our country, according to USA Gov. It is necessary to register to vote before the election to feel less rushed and to eliminate it as an excuse not to vote. The next main point I will speak about is reasons why people do not vote. According to the Science News for Students in 2018, Bethany Brookshire wrote that people do not vote because registration takes work. The United States is one of the only countries that does not automatically register each citizen to vote. Instead, it is up to each person to sign up to vote. Brookshire included in her article, a 2012 Pew Research Center study reported that 51 million citizens, nearly 1 in 4 eligible to vote, had not registered. The type of friend group you hang out with can affect whether you vote or not. Brookshire states that some individuals do not care about politics, which leads to voter apathy. If a social group does not regard politics as very important, its members may not see voting as very important. Where elections occur often, people may experience voter burnout. Brookshire mentions that learning about political issues and getting out to the voting polls can be a hassle for some people. If people are asked to vote too often, they might just opt out of the whole process. The final point I will discuss is why your vote matters. Phrases like, "I feel like my vote doesn't matter," or "neither of the candidates will help improve our nation, so why waste my time?" are commonly heard when the topic of politics arises. In 2018, on NPR.org, Dominica Montero wrote that there have been more than a dozen races decided by a single vote or ending in a tie in the last 20 years. Montero provides the example that there were 23,000 votes cast. The tie was broken by pulling a name out of a bowl, and Republican David Yancey was declared the winner. The result was heightened by the fact that the win gave Republicans control of the state house by 1 single seat. As a U.S. citizen, your vote matters and will better the future. In 2018, on the website, EBSC co-host Kimberly Hernandez wrote, "This great nation went through periods of war, desperation, and tears for us, and we should not let that be in vain. We have the opportunity to choose who we want to represent and lead us because we do not live in triumphs anymore. We live in a democracy." Casting your vote shows that you respect and care for our country and the future generations. As Hernandez wrote, our vote can affect the lives of unborn babies, how teachers are paid, and determine whether veterans receive the care that they deserve. As stated before, people fought for the right to vote from the 1820s to the 1960s. Individuals who protested and picketed were thrown into jail over something that they believed in. African American men were toyed with, making it hard to vote and allowing them to only vote for one party. Women were looked at as housewives and mothers, not people whose opinions mattered. The Voting Rights Act declared that every U.S. citizen had the right to vote. We as Americans today need to take time on Election Day to fill out a simple ballot to declare who we want in charge of our states and country. To conclude, I hope I have successfully actuated and moved you to vote in the next upcoming election. I aspire to see a change in our future generations as I have explained to you the history of the fight that our ancestors went through in order to receive the right to vote. I strive to see motivation among people to register and claim the right to vote as Americans, as I have explained the registration process. As select people choose not to vote because effort is required, more political ties occur. I now believe that I have given each one of you a reason why every individual vote matters now and in the years to come. And remember, complaining about politics and presidential flaws is not allowed unless you have done your part by voting as a United States American citizen.
Very good.